Aliens Explored is a podcast exploring famous and obscure cases of UFO sightings, alien abductions and other strange events from both a believing and a sceptical perspective whilst keeping an open mind. I'm Stu Jackson, a professional actor and amateur ufologist with a particular interest in the crop circle phenomenon. I'll be debating that otherworldly visitations are real. The truth is out there.
And I'm Neil Kelly. I'm a professional actor as well and used to work for the military as an intelligence analyst. I'll be arguing from a more doubtful point of view. I mean, it's all a bit far-fetched, isn't it?
Most of us are already familiar with the very famous 1947 Roswell UFO Incident, where a flying saucer allegedly crashed and was recovered by the military. But a new documentary on Discovery Plus called Roswell, The Final Verdict looks to explore the incident in even more detail. Join myself and Neil here on Aliens Explored as we have an exclusive interview with the star of Roswell, The Final Verdict, Marcus Churchill, who plays the instrumental character Major Jesse Marcel.
Hello listeners and welcome back to Aliens Explored, your weekly look at the mysterious skies and whatever mysterious things they leave behind on the ground or at the bottom of the sea. I'm one of your hosts, Neil Kelly.
And I'm your other host, Stu Jackson. Hello, Neil.
And we've got a special treat for our listeners this week, haven't we, Stu? Where we've got a live, well, not live, but we've got an interview with Marcus Churchill regarding his role in a new documentary series called Roswell, The Final Verdict.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our... So, well, actually, we've had the chat. Let's not lie to our listeners. We've had the chat. We're now introducing the chat. But it was lovely to catch up with Marcus again. Marcus, I know Marcus personally, having worked with him on set. But, yeah, really, it's such a nice chap.
He's really nice. That's how he struck me too.
He genuinely is, and really interesting as well. What he had to say from his perspective about the whole Roswell thing. It's probably worth mentioning who is playing in advance, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's Major Jesse Marcel, who was one of the first people on site after the very famous Roswell incident, where a flying saucer allegedly crashed, and that. So, listeners, if you cast your mind back to the photos that you saw of the time, there is one where a guy is crouched down and he is holding up material allegedly from the crash. That is Jesse Marcel, Major Jesse Marcel. This is who Marcus plays. So a really instrumental person in the whole Roswell incident. Neil, had you heard of Jesse Marcel before?
I think I've probably... I've certainly heard of Roswell, and I've probably skimmed across the name, but not attached too much significance to it. I think most of the... Most writings about Roswell are whether it happened or not, or whether it was actually an otherworldly visitation, or whether it was, as the Air Force initially they said it was a crash saucer-shaped object, which they quickly revised to say, oh no, it was a weather balloon.
Yes, the famous retraction there.
Because as we all know, when balloons come down, they come down hard and shatter.
They do.
And leave bodies strewn about the place.
Yes, alien bodies. Bodies. Let's be accurate. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's go over to the interview with Marcus. And do enjoy, listeners. He's just a nice chap to talk to. So, hello, Marcus Churchill. Thank you very, very much for joining us today. Very excited. It's been a little while since.
It's been quite a few years, yes, and that fateful day in a very nice pub somewhere in the Herefordshire countryside, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. But it was,
yes, yeah. That was the first one. The second one was a freezing cold church in the middle of nowhere.
Very likely. Sounds very likely.
Yeah.
So, you got to stop meeting like this.
It's a small world.
So
just for your personal health and comfort, really.
For Neil's benefit and for the benefit of our listeners, Marcus and I, we worked on a film together a few years ago, Wuthering Heights, which we're very much looking forward to seeing, aren't we?
Yes, which is not currently available to view. And
soon, hopefully, soon.
They're working on it.
So it was a really nice experience as well. I had loads of fun on that shoot. Really, really nice atmosphere on the set.
Oh, Elsa is absolutely lovely. The director, writer, producer.
Everything. Literally everything.
She did everything, I think, behind the scenes. But that's not what we're here to talk about today, though, is it? You've recently done an amazing documentary for Discovery Plus, Roswell, The Final Verdict, talking about the famous UFO crash. So do you want to tell our listeners the character you played first?
Yes, well, I was called in to play the character. Well, I say character. The actual person was Major Jesse Marcel, who was a U.S. Army intelligence officer, I believe, 509th Division, and he was the first official at the scene of the crash site. There was a rancher named Mac Brazel who woke up one morning to find all this debris all over his property, and he called in. He went to the local sheriff, who then called the army, and Jesse Marcel was the first man on the scene, the first person to actually inspect the debris. So he was there from day one. Basically, that's where it all sort of started. Quite an integral part of the entire sort of conspiracy story.
Excellent, and of course, I would imagine most of our listeners are familiar with the Roswell incident.
Yes, it's the daddy of all.
I would hope
UFO stories, isn't it? Really,
absolutely. Yes, the incident has been described. This is on Wikipedia, been described as the world's most famous, most exhaustively investigated, and most thoroughly debunked UFO claim. So,
Wikipedia, that famous font of all accurate knowledge.
The authority on every issue. Yeah, that's the one.
Absolutely. Conspiracy theories about the event nevertheless persist, and the Roswell incident continues to be of interest in popular media, which I guess by that they mean you, Marcus. So, so my first question is did you actually have any personal interest in the Roswell incident before you started working on this project?
It's the sort of thing that everybody has heard of. Everyone is aware of the Roswell. They call it an incident, which I find really interesting. It's always referred to as an incident rather than an occurrence or a happening, or it's always sort of alluded to that it's definitely there, but in the same sentence it's always alluded to that it's a load of rubbish. So it's always sort of been in my conscience. I wouldn't say I was particularly interested. You always sort of keep half an eye on things like that. I mean, it's been in popular culture for so long that I don't think you can help but already kind of have an opinion on it. I think because of all the things that have been in the media over the years, and various sort of fictional TV series and things like that have been in the public eye as well. But as for a personal interest, I wouldn't say I had a personal interest. Probably more just an awareness of it happening.
That's cool. And what about Jesse Marcel himself? Now, again, most of our listeners will probably be very familiar with him. They'll know he dragged his son out and showed him the material and said, "You're never going to see this again in your life." And they'll know famously into astronomy, all these things. But what about the sort of portraying the character of Jesse Marcel? Does your perception of ufology sort of differ from what his were, or do they marry up quite nicely?
It's interesting because I'd never heard of him when I got the part. So obviously, as an actor, you do your research before you go into any role. And the more I looked into it, the more I realised he's quite a very important part of the whole situation, being the first man on the scene, and always, his entire life maintaining that this definitely happened, no matter what the military told him to say. This definitely happened. And as you say, he showed his son some of the debris as well, which again is one of the scenes in the documentary. So he's very important in the whole thing. And so the more I sort of played into it, and the more I learnt more about him as we went on. You know what I mean? He seemed like a very, very honest man. I mean, people who know him would say he was kind and he was generous. He wasn't a liar. So I think just from getting to know him, you do start to sit and think, actually, is there something here? Do you know what I mean? He's the sort of man you would trust if he told you something. So I think the more I sort of looked into it, and the more I took part in the filming and things like that, the more I think I became more open to the possibility that this actually could have happened. Whereas before I may have been more of not a denier, but just someone who was sort of just not really letting that sort of thing enter into their conscience.
Yeah. On this show, we call them a Neil.
I'll see how the dynamic works. Okay, brilliant.
Yes, yeah. I mean, my experience of my personal experience of intelligence officers is that they're a bunch of lying, backstabbing bastards a lot of the time. So it sounds like if someone wasn't really a bit of a fish out of water.
Just from everything I found out, and having seen the documentary as well. Obviously, I think, without sounding too biased, the documentary, as they go along, I think that the makers become sort of more and more convinced themselves as well, if you know what I mean. I think they've sort of come at the standpoint that this definitely happened and we're going to prove it. I don't think it's unfair to say that.
Right.
But again, he just seemed like such a genuine man, and all sort of eyewitnesses and friends and things like that, and accounts. He just didn't seem the type to make something like that up. So it's an interesting sort of angle.
Okay.
That's
that sort of segues nicely into my next question, because this film is called Roswell: The Final Verdict. Are you able to tell us what the final verdict is, or would that be a spoiler?
Well, they call it the final verdict. I'm not entirely convinced. There's still going to be hundreds more documentaries about Roswell, but I think the one that sets this one apart is that they use an artificial intelligence lie detection system. So they've taken interview footage from eyewitnesses and friends and family of eyewitnesses from the 70s, 80s, 90s, old footage, because obviously they're no longer with us anymore. They've taken footage and they've analysed facial movements, vocal tones, things like that, put it through this AI computer, and determine whether what they're saying is true or false. And most of the time, if it's not too much of a spoiler, it comes out true. But again, it's a computer, it's AI. You can never be 100% sure if it's accurate or not. But all the experts on the program seem completely convinced that it's that everyone's telling the truth, and all this definitely happened. But I think even if it had come out false, I think they probably would have said that anyway, if I'm honest. Because I think all the experts they've got on there,
yes, and if
they're definitely believers.
Yeah, and if you genuinely wrongly believe something, well, that will come out as the truth as well.
That's the thing as well. If something happened 50 years ago, and you remember it a certain way, you're going to believe that. You're going to believe that's the truth, if you know what I mean. So it's they call it the final verdict, and it's very interesting, and no one's done it before. It is very interesting how it all works, and I see totally what they're trying to do with it. Absolutely, what they're trying to do with it. But I think again, it's really interesting to watch, and it actually, when I watched it back, it's very engaging. It does draw you in. It really does draw you in. You really want to know what this lie detector, for want of a better word, is going to come out as when they show these clips. So it does. It is an interesting take on it. Very interesting take on it.
Absolutely, and just for context, it was 74 years ago. So yeah, not many of the protagonists are still going to be around.
No. As I say, a lot of the footage they're using is from the 70s or the 80s. Like the Jesse Marcel stuff is quite a famous sort of interview But they've analysed all his sort of facial movements and tone of voice and things like that to determine whether he's telling the truth or not. So it's a fresh new take.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah. We've discussed sort of lie detectors, as they're incorrectly called, on this show many times.
Incorrectly, but almost uniformly told.
We have this argument every time.
Well, yeah, but let's get to it. Yeah, someone will stand up in a court and say a polygraph is not a lie detector, and then in the next breath they'll call it a lie detector. So it's such common parlance that
with this sort of new take with the show, it's still not answering questions definitively, I don't think. And I suspect the producers knew that was never really going to be the outcome anyway. I think they're just trying to put a whole new spin on something that's been investigated over and over again. As you said, it's been proved and debunked so many times now. No one really knows what actually happened or what the original facts were and things like that. It's all been sort of watered down over the years. So. But it's it's
and if you talk to people about it, and if you talk to people 30 years after the event, well, sometimes I find it an interesting exercise to watch a film, a movie that I haven't seen for a very long time, that I think I know quite well. But when I watch it, I think, oh yeah, I didn't realise it happened like that. I thought I had a different memory of the way things have played out. And of course, 30 years on, I'm a different person to the person who watched it the first time. So, a gap of that long really does distort things.
It does, yeah, definitely.
Indeed. And it, to be honest, it kind of answers my next question, which is like, obviously, it's called the final verdict. So I was going to ask, like, is it really a final verdict? But I'll alter the question slightly. Do you think down the road we're going to end up coming up with more knowledge, more information is going to come to light? Because the older it gets, the more of a cold case it becomes.
Yes, I think it's hard to say because obviously they're using all this AI technology. But they're using it on footage which is now 30 years old, maybe even 50 years old if it's from the 70s. So they're not going to really find anything that hasn't already been said, I don't think. Unless the American government suddenly goes, oh, here's all the files, this is what it really was, this is why we covered it up. I don't think anything's really going to change. I think the reason that it all started is because they just sent that press release out before actually... I think they got a bit excited back in 1947, sent a press release out saying, oh, look, we've got a flying saucer. And then because they retracted it 2 days later, that's where it all started. I think if they'd have just hung fire and investigated properly, no one would have heard of it. If it was a cover-up, they'd have covered it up.
Was that the first time the term flying saucer was used?
Oh, that, I think you'd have to ask Stu that one. He's probably the expert on that.
Yeah.
No, flying saucer was in common parlance by that point, but that was more observation of the way that UFOs or flying saucers moved across the sky, and it was actually used by a reporter to describe the skipping motion that it made, like if you were to skip a saucer across a lake of water. It was describing the motion rather than the shape, but it's been taken to... It's been abused and misused.
I mean, some of the eyewitnesses...
and then here we are with Roswell, with what appears to be a crashed saucer shaped thing.
That's it. Like some of the first eyewitnesses, because there were two crash sites. One was the one that Jesse Marcel was involved with, which is just debris. And then the other crash site, which apparently had the damaged flying saucer in it. And I think it was 4 alien bodies dotted around. Again, whether that's true or not, who knows? But that, the witnesses said it was a disc-shaped object, and the descriptions of the aliens seem to corroborate each other as well. Whether they just got that from a 1940s comic, or whether they've spoken to each other somehow, or they've heard the first description and decided that's an accurate one. Who knows? But it does seem to be the stereotypical alien body and face that we all sort of are familiar with seems to stem from that incident, from what I can tell.
The grey alien,
with the large heads.
Well, it's really good to hear that they've. Yeah, amazing that they talk about both crash sites, because I have this thing whenever I start talking to people about Roswell, and they say about the crash site.
Yeah,
Well,
they were a long way
as you very rightly saying. It's really good to hear they
really
were. They were a hell of a way apart. So it's really good to hear that actually on this particular documentary they've done their research.
It wasn't
because there are so many out there.
Yeah, it wasn't even near Roswell. Roswell was the army base that everything was brought back to, allegedly, which is why it's called the Roswell Incident. And nothing actually happened in Roswell other than the fact that they brought everything back there, allegedly. I have to keep saying that.
Whatever it was, they took it to Roswell.
My sort of thought has always been, if it wasn't aliens, this far along in the future since it happened, why haven't they just said what it was? I know they tried a few years ago, and no one sort of believed it, with like anti-Russian spy balloons or something like that. But why has no official documents been released if it wasn't aliens? Why have they still not saying anything about it? Why is Hangar 18 still somewhere that people can't go? What are they hiding? Which is a whole new conspiracy theory. There's a whole new conspiracy theory on the side. If it's not aliens, what are they hiding in there?
And it's hard to believe that anything they might have been working on an Air Force base 74 years ago, which was top secret then, new technology then, it's unlikely that it will be top secret now.
And as Jesse Marcel himself said, and they say in the documentary, he's an intelligence officer. If there's new materials or new technological developments on the American side, Russian side, any other side, he'd probably know about it, and he'd probably recognise it if he saw it. But he still maintains and testifies.
Well, he worked on cutting
edge stuff he's never seen before.
Yeah, he worked on very cutting edge technology. Yeah. He worked on the nuclear program, didn't he? Really, for him to say it's a flying saucer.
Even to say this is not of this world. It's a big statement, especially in those. The very paranoid days back then as well. Very paranoid days, which I think probably didn't help the situation either.
That's it.
Well, given the threat of nuclear war then, and certainly post 9/11, you would think that anything that came into US airspace that didn't or couldn't or wouldn't identify itself very clearly would be immediately shot down.
Yeah, exactly. In which case, the army would know about it. They'd be the ones that shot it down if it was anything from anywhere else. They had radar and things like that in those days. They were capable of detecting things like that. But when it came down, no one seemed to know anything about it. So it's there's so many arguments for and against. It can blow your mind.
Yeah,
it gets you too much.
Yeah. Although I guess if it was something that was capable of evading their air defences and that they couldn't shoot it down, that would be something they wouldn't want to admit to openly straight away.
On the other side, it's
But 74 years ago, it was before the US Air Force was really using jets. They didn't really take on jet planes until they came up against Russian MiGs in Korea. Some 3 years after this incident, that's when they suddenly said, "Oh shit, we need."
They were
jets.
still sort of using German jets, weren't they, to get the technology to put in their own aircraft and things like that in 1947. So I've got all this information from watching the documentary, by the way.
Yes. So I guess the next question is, whose verdict is it? Is this an official government verdict? Their last word on the subject, at least for now.
I don't think. No, this is definitely not sanctioned by the American government or the military. I don't think this is probably just an independent thing. Because I say it's the documentary seems very sort of weighted in favour of saying that everything actually happened. There's a big military cover-up. There, an alien spacecraft really did land. All the debris, people really did see it. People saw alien autopsies and alien bodies and things like that. So I don't think it's anything to do with the government. I don't think the government are overly worried about it, because if they were that worried, they would have, they'd be clamping down much more on things like that. They wouldn't even let it see the light of day. But I'm not sure who.
Well, that's an interesting angle on it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've argued on this podcast many times that we as a society are being prepared and conditioned for acceptance of these things. So this is why I would argue that, information gets drip fed to us through entertainment movies. I mean, like you said earlier, the grey alien is now it's firmly established as symbol, that's what aliens look like. Yeah. Well, it's only through media doing that's created that sort of conditioning with us. So it's interesting, as you say, it is quite sort of almost anti-government, but they haven't censored it. They haven't
not as far as I'm aware
taken a dim view of it.
Not as far as I'm aware. It's still broadcasting, and it's everything I did, barring one scene, is in there. And the scene that didn't make it was a bit of a puffy Hollywood bit for the end anyway. So that's probably why it's not there, because it wasn't factually correct. It was just a nice sort of closing scene where Jesse Marcel goes into his office, and they're all saying, "Oh, all the debris has been hidden away by the government," but he opens his safe and there's just a tiny bit of debris in his safe that he's keeping for himself and things like that. But there's no proof that actually happened, so I think that's probably why that hit the cutting room floor. It was a nice little scene though. I mean, it's still broadcasting. No one appears to have censored anything on there. I think the government, the American government, are more than happy to just let people go on believing what they want to believe at the moment. Well, there's no real reason for them to worry about it, I don't think. It's just probably, as far as that's concerned, it's just another bunch of conspiracy theorists.
Well, there is quite a bit of disclosure coming from the government about UFOs anyway at the moment. They're releasing their own footage of otherworldly craft. They're not calling it otherworldly craft.
Unidentified. They just leave it at that.
They're releasing it themselves.
But there's, everybody's got telescopes. You can track things so easily from a mobile phone these days. Everyone's got, well, not everyone, but people have got like apps that track aircraft and things like that. Do you know what I mean? It's much harder to cover stuff like that these days. 70 years ago, you were lucky if you had a wireless radio, whereas now everybody's got all these sort of different communication methods, and it's much more difficult to cover things up.
Well, listeners, that's all we have time for this week. Join us again next week for part 2 of our exciting interview with Marcus Churchill.
Yeah, he got loads to talk about, and I mean, we do our usual digression.
Well, of course we do.
We had a really, really good chat with him, and well, I certainly found the stuff he had to say there very interesting, and my goodness, the stuff he talks about in the second half of the interview is. Well, it's worth sticking around for and coming back next week, folks.
Come back next week.
All I can say. So join us for that. In the meantime, keep watching those documentaries about Roswell and other UFO incidents and the skies. Take care for now.
Bye-bye. Aliens Explored is a Fecal Films production in association with Juicy Falls. Music by Darren Mafucci and editing by Stu Jackson. Find us on Twitter or Facebook by searching Aliens Explored, or visit us on aliensexplored.com.